I think we can declare that this week officially bridges the gap between Egghead and ELB. One thing I was going to say by the end of last year was that I strongly suspect that we should be in ELB around April, cause that's when Yuso's birthday is. Oda sometimes does this weird thing where he has a chapter of pure setup, where people are standing around or running around all over the place, but then he compensates for it in the next chapter where the pacing really picks up. Now there are two things that got me to think, like why didn't this happen sooner? The first one is like why didn't Saturn stab Vegapunk last chapter? I mean, it's not like there was anybody there to protect him. At first, Sanji did tell Bonnie that he was going to look into that, but then he had to go back and skywalk all the way up to shield Bonnie from the lasers. The other thing is why is Bonnie barely being told now that she can control the Kuma Pistas? I think the last one is a little bit more justifiable because Vegapunk is kind of a great character. So, I think him keeping that a secret for a while was probably him acting on behalf of his own self-preservation. Regardless, the whole thing with B being able to take control over the Posy Pistas just in the nick of time does feel like a less offensive version of most being able to conjure up dragon clouds to save Onigashima. I also noticed that after Saturn stabs Vegapunk, he just kind of goes away, giving other characters time and space to get close to Vegapunk. Compare this to Akainu where after he turns Ace into a donut, he notices that Ace is still alive and so he's about to charge and with another attack and Jim has to intervene, shortly followed by Marco and Vista. That's a great example of how you build tension even after a character has taken a serious hit. Then again, getting stabbed in One Piece more often than not doesn't really mean anything anymore. Recently, the anime did a fantastic job at setting up the tone for the upcoming Law vs. Teach fight. They even gave the Blackbeard pirates a good old-fashioned pirate ost. It reminded me of something out of Pirates of the Caribbean. That's the thing about Teach's crew is that whenever the Blackbeard pirates are on screen, they're pretty much the only crew. With the exception of maybe Shanks' crew a little bit too, that reminds me that conceptually One Piece is supposed to be about pirates. There's so much wild stuff going on nowadays that it kind of makes it hard to remember that One Piece technically started out as a pirate manga. So, even though they're the antagonists, Teach's crew does serve to ground the story in that sense. Also, the preview for next week shows Teach using some kind of red lightning type hockey thing, and we also see Law with a little bit of red lightning as well. So, I really wonder what that's going to turn out to be like. Is that hockey? To avoid issues with copyright, obviously, the brand of clothing that we see Crocodile wearing in the cover page is the One Piece World version of this brand right here. I'm sure you've seen polo shirts with the Crocodile logo in real life. Speaking of stuff related to Robin, I thought it was important to figure out how she had gotten injured in the first place to the point of it affecting her mobility. There was a time where we actually cut away from Egghead to see different events like Kid being defeated by Shanks, the whole thing with Garp and Hashino, plus the stuff that happened at the Ryugu Kingdom. When we cut back to Egghead, Robin is already wounded, wearing some bandages, and we don't know what happened to her. So, I went back and pieced some things together. The last time we see Robin before the story cuts away from Egghead, she's actually part of a trio along with Chopper and Atlas, and she's worried that something bad is going to happen to Vegapunk. After which, Atlas remembers that there's an old lab in Egghead that isn't used anymore, and that she suspects that's where Vegapunk could be. Robin hears that and tells Atlas to lead the way to the lab. Upon further inspection, I found that the room Atlas is referring to in that scene is actually the old Devil Fruit Research Lab, which is the same thing as the basement where Shaki finds Vegapunk and the Cypher Pole agent being held captive by York. Since we know that Shaki ended up getting shot by York, it would follow that if Robin's group was headed in that direction, maybe the one responsible for Robin's injuries is York as well. I'm sure the anime or in SBS will fill in the blanks, or maybe we'll get like a little mini Grave flashback from Robin's perspective at some point to illustrate the confrontation that took place. It gets me to wonder if the Seraphim might have been involved in that as well. Speaking of off-screening stuff, This sentence from Nami from the official translation caused Zoro to be the recipient of a lot of online slander recently. Nami says, Zoro is still being held up by Lucci, so Jinbei went to put a stop to that and keep him from getting lost. I honestly thought that we would be getting an update in this chapter of the Zoro versus Lucci situation, and of course, we don't. So just for the sake of being informative, I wanted to add in what Nami says in the official Spanish translation. In Spanish, she says, Zoro is still busy with Lucci. Jinbei has gone to put an end to that. After all, Zoro does tend to get lost. The difference is minimal, but I think what's being conveyed is that the fight needs to end as soon as possible, and Zoro needs to get back to the crew cause we're getting out of here. So, in this time-sensitive context, Zoro has two things working against him. The first one is that he's up against unawakened Gen, which is known for their durability and endurance. So, that takes time. But then also, Zoro gets lost. So, by sending in Jinbei, you potentially deal with two issues at once. It's a no-brainer. Like you save a whole bunch of time that way. Now something I had mentioned that I felt needed to happen that we can now cross off the list was for Bonnie to be able to recognize Luffy as Na. And not just her, but we also get a small panel of Kuma with a little spark effect coming from his head, signaling to me that something clicked for him at the cider sound of Gear 5 as well. The connection I make is that just like we see the ancient giant reawakening due to the drums of liberation, I think it's very possible for something similar to happen here with Kuma as well, cause he seems to be reacting to Na in a similar fashion. It's kind of interesting how in this chapter, we get a glimpse of Na's influence over the giant people. Not only do we have Dory and Brigitte show up,